I lived a typical American life when I was younger. I dreamed of earning lots of money and having a big fancy mansion and driving a very fancy car, eating whatever I wanted, trading stocks and bonds at night just to earn more money and repeat that cycle. There's a high degree of consumption. And clothing was no different. I remember being younger and going into big stores with bright lights and clothes stacked high and wondered how they could get the clothes to be cheaper and cheaper, and I could get new clothes as often as I could afford, and I would work hard to get more money so I could buy more clothes and just continue consuming. And then I realized when I was around 25, I had to change my life. My eyes opened, and something happens when your eyes open because you can't close them again to these truths. And I realized that my entire life, I was part of a lot of problems. But I had no idea how to change my life. It seemed, where would I start? And so I picked one area of my life, something that seemed impossible to me. I decided to go vegetarian for 30 days. And I said to myself, if I do not die, I may keep going with this thing. Now, the truth be told is I thought for sure I would fail and that this little experiment with changing my life would be quickly over. But I'm not telling you to go vegetarian yourself, but I'm here today to say that I didn't die. And I did keep going with that thing. And it trickled into other areas of my life. And I started looking and realizing that I got fascinated with the tiny house movement. Maybe that dream of the big mansion could just start disappearing. And if you ever have a chance to find this house on the internet and look inside this house, it is a treasure chest of fascination of what can be done in a very, very, very small space. And neither am I saying we should all go live in 100 square foot homes. It's quite small. But it did start changing my mind about how much space I needed. And rather than pursue the American dream of more and more and more space and larger and larger and larger house, I realized maybe I could shrink down that dream and it would allow me to spend more time with my son outside, maybe go spend more time with friends, get more exercise. And this started a domino effect, and I learned a theory about dominoes. Dominoes can knock over another domino that's 50% larger than itself. So if you line up a series of dominoes that each gets 50% bigger, and you merely knock over that first domino, you have the ability to knock over ones much larger. And this became true in my entire life. But I didn't know how to change my clothing. I had changed the food I was eating. I had changed my ideas about my shelter. But clothing, that other third necessity, seemed elusive to me. Until about 3 years ago, when co-founder of Fed by Threads, Jade Beal, and we got a letter from the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona about hunger across the United States. 49 million Americans face food insecurity. Now you may be saying, what does this have to do with emotional capitalism? And frankly, what does this have to do with clothing? Well, we came up with this tiny idea. We decided we would put one rack of t-shirts into the window of our dance and yoga studio, and we would put a sign that would say, every time you buy one of these shirts, we will feed 12 emergency meals to food banks across the United States. Now, this is fine and good, and in the last 10 years, there's been a rise in companies that are doing good things. You may be familiar with some shoe companies that when you buy a pair of their shoes, they give a pair of the shoes away to someone in need. But what you don't hear those companies talk about is who made those shoes? Where were those shoes made? Under what conditions were those shoes made? But on April 24th of 2013, all that changed. And today, the very day that I am giving this talk to you, marks the 2-year anniversary from when the Rana Plaza building collapsed in Bangladesh, which some of you may know of, where 1,100 garment workers were killed. They were crushed. Not from a terrorist attack, you see, but from being forced to work in a building to keep their job. They had to enter a building that was noticeably crumbling and cracking, all to make clothing for big Western brands. Now, if any of us here wear clothing, which I think all of us do in the room, we must know about Rana Plaza, because this is a reality. And this led to what's called a fashion revolution, which is today, as I speak, in 66 countries, individuals and companies are asking, who made my clothes? And they're proud to show their labels and say where their clothing was made and who made it. It's sweeping the world, a change in mentality about where clothing was made. And that is why we have been part of that movement even before Rana Plaza collapsed. We shifted to all sweatshops-free factories to produce Fed by Threads clothing. And we've gone beyond that. We now carry 25 brands from around the country. And this is me in Groceries Apparel's factory in Los Angeles. And when customers walk around my store, they're able to see exactly the state in the United States where the garment was produced, if not the exact city in the United States where the garment was produced. And they look at me when they walk around and they say, I've never seen this before. I've never seen a place where I could know exactly where this was made. And they can ask me about who owns the company, what's the culture of the company. It's created an ecosystem of sweatshop-free jobs across America. So when people buy a dress from Traverse City, Michigan, they know that their dollars are landing in that microeconomy and helping those families that have garment jobs in that city to be able to put food on the table. So we don't just provide meals to people, 12 meals through food banks across the country from every piece that you buy, but we support an ecosystem of jobs across the country which helps families as well. But we didn't just stop with that first question of who made the clothing. We went further to say, what is the clothing made of? And in my lifetime, that was never a question that I asked. It was simply, does it look cute on me? Does the color make my skin look good? And instead, we went further. And we had to say, what were the materials? And we shifted to all sustainable organic materials, organic cotton, hemp, bamboo, repurposed wood pulp, recycled plastic bottles can be converted into clothing. Not that everyone wants to wear plastic, but it is possible. And people say to me, why did you make this choice? I imagine everyone in this room would not want to drink what is coming out of that pipe, yes? Then why would we put that into clean drinking water? Why would we pollute clean drinking water supplies? And we made a decision. We don't need to do this for someone to look fabulous and walk out of my store with that dress. I think business is fabulous, but we have big choices that we can make. We don't need to pollute our drinking water. Drinking water is going to be a valuable commodity now, and for the next 100 years, water is going to be a tremendous, tremendous question that we need to look at together. So what is emotional capital? It's not just about giving away a free pair of shoes when you buy a pair, and it's not just about giving away some meals when you buy a dress or a shirt. What is it worth when someone walks into my store and says, simply coming to your store has changed my life. It has changed the way that I think about everything that I do. It's changed the decisions that I'm making. I'm bringing my daughter, my son here. I want them to see what this is like and to pose these ideas. What is it like? What does it mean to me? What is the value when an 11-year-old girl says, I'm visiting Tucson all the way from North Carolina with my family, and I had to come see your store because I follow you on Instagram, and I'm making a documentary about the clothing mills that are coming back to life in my state because people are voting for sweatshop-free clothing. What's the value to me when a teenager from Nigeria who's immigrated to the United States, whose school brought her for a school trip to my store to learn about what we do, and 2 weeks later she comes back and she says, I've decided to start my own jewelry line out of recycled jeans. I'm going to make beautiful jewelry, and I believe in myself, and her chin's held high, and she has a belief that she can do something different as well. What does it mean when someone says to me, my family has food on the table because I have a good job, because of what you're doing, and because of what other people like you are doing? What does it mean when someone at this very event says to me just 20 minutes ago, I learned about Fed by Threads well before this TED event, and I want to open a taco joint that helps feed people in Brazil when I go back to Brazil. We have to go further when we think about emotional capital and what is valuable. And it's not just about for-profit versus non-profit. That is not the right question to ask. It is, I love business. I was born a businessman. But it's about turning down the volume on greed just a little bit. Because greed is corrupting business. Business isn't broken, but it is a little bit of that greed factor. But when two people who are not greedy decide to do business together, they can do business for the rest of their lives, and it can be a beautiful song and dance. And you can spend it too. Sometimes as business owners, we make mistakes, yes? And you need to ask forgiveness from your customers. And that is when you cash in that emotional capital that you've been earning by being in the trenches and doing things differently. And you cannot buy that forgiveness. It is not a financial capital issue. It is, have you earned enough? Does your customer base say, I've watched them for so many years, and this is just a tiny mistake they've made? There's now framework about emotional capital. You may or may not have known B Corp certification. B Corps are amazing. And we've been in touch with the B Corp folks, and we're going to begin the process of getting certified ourselves as a B Corp. And when I looked at the regulations of what it means to be a B Corp, I realized we've already been doing a lot of those things from the very, very inception of Fed by Threads. So I encourage you, take a look at B Corp certification. If you have to raise capital, which many of us do, many of us social entrepreneurs aren't rich, make sure you get shareholders who understand emotional capital and its value as much as financial capital and financial profit. They will get on board for the long term. Bronnie Ware wrote a book after working as a hospice worker with the dying. And she looked at the 5 main regrets that she noticed, not scientifically based, but her anecdotal understanding of the 5 regrets of the dying. And one of them was people at their deathbed said, I wish I had allowed myself to be happier throughout my life. And I believe that having an understanding of emotional capital and bringing that into your business life is part of a long-term road to happiness so that you don't live with that regret when you die. So you're not saying, oh, I'll save my emotional capital and raising of emotional capital for my free time or when I'm 70 and above and I've retired or for the weekends. Bring the idea of emotional capital into your business life. So I urge us all, find your domino and knock it over, that first domino, and allow your life to potentially change. Every one of us in this room can make positive changes in our life starting now. It is never too late to say, what have I been living? How have I been living? What changes do I have the courage to make? Make a small change first and see what happens. At Fed by Threads, we are proud to have crossed 316,652 emergency meals fed across the country. We're the only clothing store in the country doing that, combined with only supporting American jobs and an ecosystem of American jobs and using sustainable organic materials. It's really put us in a very small canoe, but it's allowed me to connect with really amazing people. And that's a huge part of emotional capital, is the human relations. It's knowing people by name. This is my son, Sequoia. He's 3. I work very hard for him. My hope is that this next generation grows up with an understanding of emotional capital as much as financial capital. It's not what the world can do for your company, it's what your company can do for the world. Thank you.